Hello and welcome to a BRIT'S Guide to Fantasy NFL. This series is designed to inform you how to play fantasy American football, particularly if, like me, you've not grown up with the sport. Starting episode 1 with the basics, we'll move on to greater detail and depth in the coming weeks. American football is arguably the best suited sport for fantasy leagues, with actions broken down into dozens of individual plays, all with a clear start and end. Every play's impact on the game is clearly measurable and comparable in the form of yards gained or lost. I've also played a lot of Fantasy Premier League, and by comparison, that scoring system looks very poor. For example, in Fantasy Premier League, a player simply receives 4 points for a goal, plus some arbitrary bonus of up to 3 points for his 90-minute performance. Invariably, top marks are given to goal scorers, double counting those points for forwards, and creating a very poor representation of the player's actual impact on the game. This is especially true for non-goal scorers such as N'Golo Kante, widely accepted as one of the best in the league, but his dogged tackling and quarterback-like distribution of passes just doesn't get fairly represented in Fantasy Premier League scoring. On the other hand, in Fantasy NFL, every play matters. Your running back advances the ball 8 yards downfield. Well, perfect, there's 0.8 points just for that relatively modest play. Now your wide receiver catches and runs in a huge 60-yard touchdown. There's 6 points for the touchdown, 6 for the yardage, a total of 12 points that fairly represents that play's critical impact on the game. I'll cover scoring in much more detail in episode 2. Your role in Fantasy American football is to build a team that will consistently score more points than your opponent. The squad you are tasked with building broadly reflects what are known as the skill positions in American football. Starting with the quarterback, undoubtedly the most important player on the NFL field. His job is part field general and part gunslinger, moving the ball carefully downfield with accurate passing or slinging it deep like Patrick Mahomes to pull touchdowns from nowhere. On the typical NFL offense, there is just one quarterback, and your fantasy team will be just the same, one quarterback. Lining up behind, or just to the side of him, will be your running back. These are the workhorses of the NFL offense, whether a bulldozer like Derrick Henry or a versatile speedster like Christian McCaffrey. Their role is to advance the ball carefully and methodically down the field, able to pick up yardage in small volumes but without the risks involved in passing the football. Most modern NFL formations feature just one running back, but fantasy football is a bit old school here, so you get to start 2 running backs. Out by the sidelines will be your wide receivers, the superstars making flashy catches and hauling in the long touchdowns, much less reliable than a running back, but able to score huge points off a single play. NFL formations do vary as to the number on the field at any one time, and this can be true for fantasy football as well. However, the standard format is just 2 wide receivers. Now to the tight end, a Frankenstein's monster hybrid of a wide receiver and an offensive lineman. These are big, broad athletes built for protecting the quarterback, but with the legs and hands to switch into receiving mode at any time. NFL teams can have up to 3 of these guys on the field in a formation, but as most are involved in blocking and not scoring fantasy points, in fantasy formats you only need to start 1. Most leagues typically have 1 flex position, but sometimes more. This spot can be filled by any running back, wide receiver, or even a tight end, though a tight end is rarely a viable option. As the name suggests, the flex position provides flexibility in setting your lineup, allowing you to strategize between starting another stale running back or a wide receiver with the potential to boom or bust. In standard leagues, you will also need to start a kicker and a team's defense, though these aren't essential and can be left out when setting up your league. A kicker, of course, will score points for successful field goals and extra point attempts. On defense, you will be selecting a whole team rather than individual players. This is simply due to the difficulty in scoring an individual defender's performance. The points you receive for your defense will depend on the total points allowed, plus any sacks, safeties, turnovers, and defensive touchdowns created.
Your team is now on the clock.
Now that you know your team's needs, it's time to get into the draft. This is always an exciting event and can honestly be one of the highlights of your season. It takes its concept, of course, from the annual NFL rookie draft, with teams taking turns picking from the vast pool of college talent. Fantasy, as in real life, a player can only be chosen once. Preparation and strategy are essential to survive the mayhem, but if this all sounds a bit daunting, Don't worry, there are many cheat sheets, guides and detailed advice available online to ensure that you don't have to study and memorise 200 odd players before your draft. And I will be dedicating the whole of episode 3 in the series on how to prepare for your first draft, so check back here in a few weeks to see that. Since players can only be drafted by one team in your league, this leads to another strategic element of the game, in-season trading. Reflecting the trading of players that occurs during real NFL seasons, creating a perfect trade that benefits you and your opponent is highly rewarding. All of this, of course, is secondary to the fantasy game itself. The format pitches players against each other in 1v1 matchups. The feeling of a big play coming from nowhere to propel your team into an unexpected lead over a rival is unbeatable and represented excellently in the interfaces of the many platforms. NFL.com here, for example, show a breakdown of exactly where points have been accrued and links to specific highlights that have changed the course of your matchup. Much like the NFL itself, the winner gets 1 point in the win column and the loser gets nothing. American sports are famously averse to ties, and Fantasy NFL is no different. Since each squad is a unique set of players and scores are measured to 2 decimal places, it effectively doesn't happen, even if it's not quite mathematically impossible. At the end of the regular season, usually 12 to 14 weeks, the league will enter the postseason, also known as the playoffs. This is a straight knockout format leading to a final or bowl in week 16 to decide the winner. League formats differ a bit here. Some may have all teams in one division and the top 6, say, will qualify for the playoffs. In this common example, the top 2 ranked teams receive a bye through the first round of the playoffs. Another common format sees the league split into multiple divisions, similar to the real NFL. In a format with 4 divisions, 4 playoff places might be awarded to the 4 division winners, and another 2 wildcard places offered to the best runners-up. The playoffs again are a straight knockout, leading to a match-up between the final 2 in your fantasy Super Bowl. So I hope you have learned something in this first introductory episode. Coming up over the next few weeks, we will cover specific topics in much more detail, such as scoring, the draft, and how to set up a successful league. So be sure to subscribe to get these episodes as they release.